Our movie opens with a real estate broker, Rick Carver, being interviewed by the police. Apparently, Rick was the last person who saw Mr. Cadwell, the victim in question, who shot himself. Rick tells the police that as soon as Mr. Cadwell saw him, he went into his house and just shot himself. And you're probably telling yourself, that's weird. But not really. You see, Rick is enlisted by a bank to do a bunch of foreclosures on evicted homes. And this dude that shot himself was someone that was about to be evicted. But he instead evicted himself from life, I guess. And we see that Rick doesn't even care when he tells all of this to the police. He's a pretty cold-hearted person. And next we see Dennis Nash, a construction worker, and a single father who's going through a bit of a financial rough patch. He owes the bank about $80,000, and his family is on the verge of being evicted from their homes. Dennis goes to court with the insurance bankers for a plea, but the judge gives him 30 days of appeal. On his way back, he tries to comfort his son Connor, and he tells him not to worry and that they're not gonna lose their homes. Dennis is very worried for his son's well-being, and he starts looking for jobs. He goes through a lot of ads, he calls as many people as possible, but he finds nothing. And to make matters worse, the following day, a group of sheriffs accompanied by Rick arrive at Dennis's place, and they tell him that the bank has officially taken ownership of their homes and they must leave immediately. Of course, Dennis points out that the court gave him a 30-day period to file for appeal, but Rick counters that by saying that he has a court order signed by a judge that says that they have to vacate the premises immediately. Rick also reveals that he offers Dennis's family $3,500 for a key settlement from the bank, and although the agreement gave Dennis's family enough time to vacate the premises, they refused it. And initially, both Dennis and his mother refuse to leave the house. And this results in a conflict between the sheriffs, and the cops tell them that they'll put them in jail if they don't leave. And they soon start gathering their things, and when Connor comes back from school, he notices that his family is being thrown out of their homes. And Connor is very upset to see this, but he can't really do anything about this. And Dennis and his family finally say their goodbyes to their neighbors, and they head to a motel. And in the motel, Lynn urges to Dennis that they should move to Tampa with their uncle. But Dennis tells her that they can't really do that because moving away would mean that Connor can't really see his friends anymore. Dennis tries to look for any job at this point to provide for his family, and he's really willing to do anything. He's super duper desperate. And the next day he fights with this guy Jeff because he accused him of stealing his tools. And as they were fighting, Rick enters the scene and he tells the workers that they have a new task. And Rick asks Dennis to join them and that he'll pay him $50. And they go over to this work site, and apparently it's this house that got flooded with sewage water, and it's so stinky. And when everybody refuses to do it, Dennis bargains with Rick and agrees to clean the house for $250. He even offers the other workers some drinks and a good wage, and they assist him and he finally gets the work done. And in the next scene, we see Dennis arriving at this grand mansion. Apparently it's the house of Rick, and he called him over to fix his AC. And after he fixed his AC, he asks him to go on a ride and he offers him a job. Dennis says yes without even asking what the job is. And as they were cruising down the street, they discover this house giving illegal electricity and water services to the next house. And Rick finds out that it's actually a house that his bank owns. So he contacts the guy that owns the house, apparently his name is Frank Green, and he asks him to remove the illegal pipelines immediately. While removing the pipelines, Frank tells Dennis that their sons attend the same school together. He also adds that he lost his job about 2 years ago and is now struggling with mortgage debt. And after removing the pipelines, Frank apologizes for stealing, and Rick tells him not to do it again. And moments later, Rick and Dennis arrive at this high-end property, and Rick instructs Dennis to take down the kitchen cabinets and other luxury decorations and to reinstall them to another house. And after which, he pays Dennis about $3,250. And after that, he asks him to join the company. Initially, Dennis is a little bit suspicious, but he can't afford to be suspicious, so he agrees. And as the days go by, Dennis starts working for Rick's company called Rick Carver Realty. And throughout his job, we see him stealing various types of electronics from evicted homes, handing evictions, and posting notices to vacate homes facing foreclosure. And at times, he sometimes faced threats of violence from the people that he evicted. And one day, we see Rick and Dennis counting the air conditioning units and pool pumps that Dennis had taken from the evicted homes. Rick explains that the government will reimburse him for the same amount required to install the ACs and pumps, and reassures Dennis of his shares of the profits. And on top of that, Rick asks him to locate all of the empty foreclosed properties in town and put fake tenants in them so that they can make some money for key settlements with the banks. And a few days later, Rick presents Dennis with a check for $7,200, which is apparently Dennis's share of their profits. Dennis declines the money and instead asks Rick to help him get his home back. And without much thought, Rick agrees to buy his house back from the bank, but states that Dennis will owe him for the remaining money. Hearing this, Dennis is overjoyed to finally get his house back and thanks his boss for the help. But then he informs Dennis that today is the day for Mr. Tanner's eviction, and he would like Dennis to come and observe the process. And not only does Dennis accompany Rick, he actually decides to do the eviction himself, and he evicts Mr. and Mrs. Tanner out of their homes. They try to fight him, but he still does it. And he kind of feels bad for doing it. He offers his help, but they reject him, saying that he disgusts them. In the next scene, we see Dennis and his family traveling to an unknown location. Of course, Dennis knows where he's going, but his family does not. And he stops the car at their old house, and he opens it and they go inside. Connor and Lynn are very surprised to see this. They're wondering what's going on, and he tells them that they're gonna move back in just a couple of weeks. And Connor gets too excited and goes to his old room, and Dennis's mom asks him how he made it happen. And he tells her that his employer purchased the house for him, and he's gradually repaying the debts in installments. But it doesn't just end there. Dennis is also evicting a lot of families from their homes, and it's starting to take a toll on his mental health. In fact, he completely breaks down after he evicted these old couple without even understanding why they were being evicted. And the more people he evicted, he became a favorite to Rick amongst all of his employees. And one day, they meet up with this guy, Mr. Freeman, who offers to entrust them with the management of over 1,000 homes. But there is a bit of a catch to it, as Freeman wants someone to keep an eye on Ortiz. Ortiz is this guy who's selling homes, and Freeman wants to keep an eye on him. And so Rick assigns Dennis to do that. And Dennis discovers that Ortiz is actually selling 100 homes to the group, with already 15 sold. And knowing this, he proposes a plan to steal all the electronic appliances of the 15 houses Ortiz has sold to the group, which will shatter the group's faith in Ortiz. In the next scene, we see Dennis enjoying his son's birthday in a motel. But his joy is short-lived, as a family he's evicted before see him. A man from the family calls him out. He asks him what he's doing here, and Dennis tries to pretend that he doesn't know who he is, but the guy has identified him really well, and they actually get into a fight. Connor sees all of this and he gets very upset. And Dennis is just too deep to get out of this whole I'm gonna evict everybody I can until I get my own home back situation. Yeah. He meets up with a bunch of people, including Kahana, and they discuss the failed deal with Ortiz, and apparently all of this was because of missing appliances in the 15 homes that Vice had purchased from him. And Rick offers to replace the missing appliances in all of the 15 homes for free if they agree to move the deal to him. And Kahana is impressed by the offer and decides to accept it. And this was what Rick wanted in the first place, and he celebrates by throwing a party at his house. And as the party winds down, Rick and Dennis sit by the pool and they have a conversation. The only thing on Dennis's mind is his house. He just wants to get it back, get his family there, and finally get back to his old life. And Rick tells him that it's gonna take a few more weeks to do that, but Dennis seems to be a little impatient. And Rick tells Dennis that he can buy any other house because he's made a significant amount of money. And Dennis takes that advice, and he buys this new mansion to his family, and he takes them there. But to our surprise, his mother Lynn and Connor just hate the idea, because they now believe that he has the money to buy this house by evicting a bunch of innocent people from theirs. And Lynn tells Dennis that she'd rather go live with her brother in Tampa, and Dennis wants to join her. Dennis is very upset by this, and the next morning he gets called into Rick's office, who hands him this fabricated document. And the document is against Frank Green, a guy who's trying to save his house, and Rick tells Dennis that he has to get it to the court by 9:45 a.m., and he emphasizes that if Frank wins this case and he gets his house, the Vice Investment Group is going to cancel the deal that they made with Rick. So Dennis has to get this done. He has to take his house from him. And when he reaches the court to submit the fake document, Dennis sees Frank and his family looking pretty hopeful because they think they're gonna keep their house. And Dennis hesitates at first to hand over the document, but Rick pressures him and he eventually does it, and Frank loses his house. And later that day, when Dennis gets home, he finds that his house is empty. Apparently his entire family left him. And this is very sad to see for Dennis, so he drinks a lot and he sleeps on the porch, and he wakes up the next morning because it's apparently Frank Green's eviction, and they go with Rick to witness everything. When they get there, they see the police questioning the neighbors. The neighbors talk about how Frank is usually a well-tempered guy, but lately he's been having problems with his wife. And the police are there because of a domestic disturbance call. And the police tell Dennis and Rick that he may be armed and dangerous. And when they tell him to drop the gun, which he did have in his hand, he starts shooting at the police. Frank starts ranting about how the court didn't give him a fair trial and that his house was seized illegally, yada yada yada. And Dennis, who was hiding behind the car at this point, goes out and tells him that his house does belong to him, and he tells him that he's the one that forged the documents and gave it to the court. And at this point, Frank surrenders to the police and his family is rescued from the house that he was holding hostage, I guess? Anyways, the cops interview Dennis and why he's here. He tells them that he's here to evict Mr. Frank, and then he gives them Rick's name while pointing at him. Rick then praises Dennis for what he just did before the cops interrogate him, and it's obvious that he's very pissed at him. And Dennis was like crying inside the car, and on the last scene we see Frank's son looking at Dennis outside his window with this face, with this look of gratitude because he actually said the truth for once, and a family was not thrown out of their homes illegally. And that's pretty much how the movie ends. I hope you guys liked our recap. Please leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, like my videos. I will see you guys on the next recap. Bye!